It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. My name is Juliana early. I'm the Head of Mechanical Aerospace Engineering at Queen's University Belfast. And I think it's great to see this type of event happening here in Belfast with increasing awareness of how our tech centres here can really lead innovation and the next generation of clean technologies across the world. Just in terms of introducing the rest of the panel members who have joined me this morning, first to my immediate right, I have Dr. Robert Best, who's the Director of Engineering at Wrightbus. As the Director of Engineering for Wrights, he's leading the team which is delivering our leading-edge battery electric and fuel cell technologies for the public transport sector, advising operators and government departments on technology adoption. And I think there's been a lot in the news recently about the role that Wrights have been playing in pushing forward kind of real leaps and bounds in our public transport tech centre. So really excited to hear what Robert has to say about that this morning. Further on across the panel, it's Professor David Rooney, who is the Dean of Internationalisation at Queen's University Belfast and Professor of Chemical Engineering. He's also the Director of the Sustainable Energy Research Group in Queen's and the Director of the Bryden Centre, which is a cross-border renewable research centre, really focusing on how we can start to develop the next generation of renewable energy solutions that are going to help, again, bring us forward towards those net zero goals. Joining us remotely, thank you very much, Ruth, is Professor Ruth Hunter, who's a professor in our School of Medicine, Dentistry and Biomedical Sciences. So we're not all engineers here this morning. We're going for a bit of an intersectorial crossover. So Ruth is a professor in the School of Medicine, Dentistry and Biomedical Sciences. Her work is around how we can improve our urban environments for better population health, including evaluation of natural experiments and urban regeneration. She's currently a WHO expert panel on urban green space interventions and an executive board member of the WHO Belfast Healthy Cities. So in terms of the panel that we have here this morning, it's cross-sector for a very good reason, because a lot of the discussions that hopefully we've all heard over the last few weeks and months in the lead up to COP and as it's run through have very much been around the fact that the challenges that we're seeing in clean tech, clean energy, it's not a single sector problem. It's going to involve input, discussion and debate from a wide range of sectors. So that's pretty much how we're sitting here this morning with the panel, is to have a look at where some of these intersections lie, where some of the opportunities potentially lie, and to get some perspectives coming from a range of different people in different sectors. So in terms of kind of first question, which I'm going to pose to David over in the end, obviously, with COP26 over the last couple of weeks, climate change has really been at the forefront of the news. I think everyone agrees there's really major challenges ahead of us, both Northern Ireland, across the UK and globally, when we're trying to meet some of these really ambitious net zero targets that have been laid out. But where do you see the key opportunities lying for us here in Northern Ireland?
Thanks, Juliana. I mean, that's a very good question to start off with, and I'm sure if John was here, he would have a slightly different answer. But maybe the beginning of this really does come down maybe to the politics of it all. Northern Ireland's quite interesting in that it is the only region of the UK which doesn't have climate legislation, and that was in fact highlighted over COP26. It's also interesting that, a bit like buses, two came along at once, you know, so we have one pushing for kind of an 82% reduction, so there's no net zero contribution there, claiming that that's what was sort of highlighted within the Climate Change Committee. Another group obviously then highlighting that that's not enough and that we should be getting to net zero totally, but then again there are counters and problems associated with that, particularly within the agricultural sector, and that's what's led to some of the issues that have come through in the last while. But of course the reality is that there's no reason why Northern Ireland couldn't in fact be negative in carbon as a society. We have abundant resources in terms of renewable electricity, in terms of wind access, or in terms of our agricultural system. And if we can really consider that there are opportunities for going negative in carbon, I think it always opens up a huge amount of space to develop new technologies and new businesses and new community groups, and which all connect together in order to be able to achieve a net negative result or a target essentially around carbon. And that's, I think, where a lot of those opportunities come from. If you're talking about hydrogen coming from green hydrogen, well, all we would need would be the rain. and the wind. And I think we've got plenty of that in Northern Ireland. If we want to then be able to valorise that hydrogen, well, we could put it directly into people's homes. We can use it in our transport system, but we can also use it to basically ameliorate some of the issues around the agricultural sector. And if we have an SME economy, if we have an innovative economy, then we can start to work together in various different solutions and use those resources of agriculture to farm carbon, to develop zero carbon communities, to link it in with hydrogen, to develop new businesses, and really end up exporting all of this in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that a lot of the discussion has obviously been around net zero, whereas we potentially have a real opportunity to look at negative and really starting to make positive changes and going that one step further. I know we had some discussions with some of the audience members who are here outside about some of their ambitions around those areas as well. So I think it's a really positive message. I mean, in terms of things like the Bryden Centre, which is looking then at cross-sector and cross-border kind of cooperation, where do you see the opportunities lying for those kind of wider scale cooperations, which are even outside of the Northern Ireland and UK region, in terms of bringing forward that kind of net or negative ambition?
Well, the opportunity, again, very similar. The opportunities really rely on using local resources and clever ways to do things and provide the things that we need in order to be able to stay in life, but doing so in a way that doesn't actually harm the environment or contribute to essentially climate change. Every part of the world will nuance those solutions differently in terms of its culture, in terms of its resource, and so on. And it's about working with those people in order to be able to do that. The climate doesn't know boundaries. Biodiversity doesn't know boundaries. It's only people, to have these geographical boundaries that are so important in terms of that ownership or whatever. What we need to do is kind of break that down. We need to recognise how we work with various different people across borders, how we can work with community groups in order to be able to come up with sustainable solutions which connect people and deliver a real true net zero economy across the world.
And I think that is a really positive message in terms of that idea of the collaboration across communities, across borders, and this not just being a geographically isolated issue. It's something that we need to look at much more widely than that. So thank you very much for that, David. In terms then of kind of looking to yourself, David, obviously Wrightbus have really been at the heart of a lot of the transformations that we've seen recently in the public transport sector. And there's been a lot of major successes being reported in the news, particularly in the launch of the battery and fuel cell equivalent vehicles which are launching out into the market. So where do you see the public transport landscape evolving to over the next decade?
Very well, thank you. The public transport area is quite an interesting area for zero emissions, primarily because a lot of the funding streams for it do come either directly or indirectly through the government. So we do see quite a high level of subsidies, which means that we can quite often lead the way when it comes to zero emission technology. I mean, for example, it's just over 15 years since we produced our first hydrogen fuel cell bus. So we have a lot of experience in hydrogen fuel cell buses, and actually it was 1998 whenever we produced our first battery electric bus. So in terms of a strong history and pedigree in zero emission vehicles, there are a few companies that have a longer history than Wrightbus. And taking that through to today, where, as we've seen through the recent TransLink launches, the vast majority of our vehicles next year will be zero emission. So we're moving from around 70% diesel today to 70% zero emission next year, which is quite a dramatic shift change, and it just shows you where our customer base in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK primarily is moving. So it's given us a very good opportunity to see how quickly the industry is moving and the appetite out there to improve the environment that we live in, and the opportunity for the transport sector, primarily around buses, to sort of lead the way with that. So from my point of view, I think things are moving quicker in our sector than in quite a few other sectors, and it's a very exciting times to be working in this area.
Yeah, and I mean, it has been, I think, an incredibly positive news story for Northern Ireland. Having been over at COP over the last couple of weeks, and obviously Robert yourself, having the vehicles there on display as people were coming through the gates was sending out an incredibly strong message of how Northern Ireland were leading the way in actually decarbonisation of our city centres, and I think an incredibly positive role in terms of demonstrating the role of clean and green tech jobs in Northern Ireland with the incredible expansion of the company. Where I think that again is sending out a very strong message that in Northern Ireland there's a very strong commitment to how we start to bring those kind of green techs and green technologies forward, with investment coming in behind that to support that development. I mean, alongside that, and again, David, you've touched on this already, you know, the move towards these new technologies, the introduction of the battery electric, the hydrogen, obviously brings with it new challenges around the energy supply system. And there's been a huge amount of debate and discussion around the role of green hydrogen in our economies and where that's going to come from going forward. So I'm going to probably ask both of you for your thoughts on this. But what do you think where we're at in terms of progress to date and actually achieving a green hydrogen supply system that's going to sustain these future vehicles? And where do you think we need to go to next? And I'll go to you first, Robert.
It's there are really two barriers towards the hydrogen economy today, and the first one is your cost of equipment in terms of and that is improving significantly with volume. We see that coming down to being very similar priced to current diesel vehicles in the next 5 years, which will remove that barrier. The second barrier, which is the one that affects the entire hydrogen economy piece, is the availability of green hydrogen, because quite simply the economy doesn't work without green hydrogen. Now, there are various other colours which can be useful in different ways to get things moving, but fundamentally it doesn't work without green hydrogen. And the key to green hydrogen is the availability of green electricity. So it is something that Northern Ireland can help lead the way in, due to our very high levels of wind availability that we have, and our already high percentage of green electricity on the grid. So effectively, the only way we can drive it forward is a greater use of this green electricity to produce green hydrogen. That is the one piece of the puzzle that we, as in terms of our greater Wrightbus company and beyond what happens in Wrightbus itself, it's the biggest area that we're focusing on, is how we can make sure that we can supply green hydrogen at the volumes needed to sustain and to develop the hydrogen economy.
That's great, thank you. And I'll probably put the same question then to yourself, David, about where you think the kind of the progress to date lies and where you see the kind of future steps being in this kind of green hydrogen-based economy.
Again, I mean, I'll just echo what Robert said. I mean, there's various different issues. I mean, in one sense, that this is a chicken and egg situation, or a supply and demand situation. We have huge opportunities to produce green hydrogen. We need to lower the cost of that production, but ultimately, that cost is going to be linked to the cost of the electricity. We need to be able to get it out into the market at sufficient volumes in order to be able to, so it becomes just publicly available. So that in order to be able to secure the infrastructure to get that investment, and people are willing to invest in it. And to get to there, it may end up having other colours of hydrogen. I mean, we talk about hydrogen as a colourless gas, but yet there's so many now colours attributed to this one, species on the periodic table. It is kind of amazing as to every week there seems to be a new colour of hydrogen. But we do need to get to that green hydrogen coming from green electricity in order to be able to produce it at scale. But within Northern Ireland, there are very good examples of this happening. We do have Northern Ireland Water, for example, have a plant down at Kinniger, not too far from here. They're looking at another one on Duncrew Street, linking it in and supporting even the wastewater treatment industry and producing hydrogen at scale. And so there's a start. There's lots of good work going on in the universities, so Queen's and with Rights, and we also have Ulster University in terms of hydrogen safety, Belfast Met in terms of their GenCom project. There's a lot of good activity across the province in terms of being able to support hydrogen infrastructure and hydrogen development for the future.
And I think that is, again, a massive strength that we have here in Northern Ireland, is that kind of interconnected skill set at all levels, kind of transitioning up and through, which are going to help move us forward. But there is kind of a role, obviously, for everyone, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, around the skill sets and where the skill sets lie today relative to where we potentially need to be in 10, 20 years' time to deliver on what's some very grand ambitions in the sector. And I would agree, I mean, similar to yourself, I mean, I'm hearing new colours for hydrogen, I think turquoise last week, in terms of where we're sitting in terms of the technologies which are underpinning that hydrogen economy and the different ways in which we're attempting to make it a bit greener and taking those kind of baby steps forward to try and move towards the full, as you said, the utopia of the full green hydrogen production system. So thank you very much for that. I mean, obviously we have a number of different interacting sectors. I mean, when we're talking particularly about moving people, getting people around our city centres. We have the opportunities which are coming from our public transport sector when we're looking at the vehicles that we're using. We're then needing to look at the energy systems which are underpinning that and where that energy is coming from. But there is a different school of thought, which is where I'm going to start to bring Ruth into the conversation here, which is around fundamentally changing the way the attitudes and behaviours around how people are moving around our cities, full stop. And Ruth has obviously done a lot of work looking at kind of urban environments, active travel, and how to start to promote active travel within urban environments to rates which are well beyond what we see today, which is again that counterbalance towards, can we bring in green vehicles? Can we also kind of start to stimulate new behaviours in the people who are using those transport systems? So Ruth, you've done a lot of work to date which has been looking at different ways globally that people have been trying to reduce car dependencies within urban environments, and you've seen varying levels of success with some of those strategies. So from some of the work that you've seen to date, are there any lessons that we can learn here in Northern Ireland about good and positive ways in which we can start to reduce car dependencies and to increase public awareness and public usage of active and public transport modes?
Yeah, thanks, Juliana. So I would start by saying that it is a big challenge, and behaviour change itself is a difficult problem to solve. So in Northern Ireland, we are one of the most car dependent regions in Europe, and we're also one of the most congested cities in the UK, and that's largely because too many people are simply driving too often. And I think in Northern Ireland, an average person makes 82% of all their journeys by car, and that's compared to 63% in other parts of the UK, and I think it's just over 50% in Ireland. So there's lots to do in this particular area. When we think about behaviour change, there's a particular tool developed by colleagues in University College London, and they talk about needing three things for successful behaviour change, and they are opportunity, capability and motivation. So certainly there are things we can do to promote changes in public attitude towards, active and public transport, such as, some of the social marketing strategies, and we see some great examples from the likes of TransLink around this, and also behaviour change programmes such as working with our schools and our workplaces and local communities that the Public Health Agency and Belfast Healthy Cities and Just Trans are doing. But really, these will only be successful if we also address the issues of opportunity and capability. And that means around improving our infrastructure, making sure we have, frequent and safe and cheaper alternatives for active and public transport. So in some ways, trying to promote changes to public attitudes is a little bit like putting the cart before the horse, because we do need to make sure that we provide the opportunities and the capabilities first, or at least in tandem with addressing public attitudes.
That's great, and I'm assuming that with that then, and again, forums like this being kind of core to it, it's about that public messaging and clarity in terms of where the benefits are lying, and using social media, events, networks to kind of try to get that message out there. In terms of kind of the wider UK, there's obviously been a target set in the UK net zero strategy, certainly for the rest of the UK, that there's an ambition that all journeys in towns and cities, that half of those would be made by some kind of active transport mechanism by 2030. How achievable do you think that is for us here in Northern Ireland in that time frame?
Yeah, so let me give some context to where we are in relation to this. So walking, cycling and public transport use for all journeys is around about 24% in Northern Ireland, so it's low. And if we look at it over the last decade, or at least the figures from 2009 to 2019, we really don't see a change. It's a very stagnant figure. So again, Northern Ireland have a long way to go here in terms of trying to hit this 2030 target. And despite, there's been various government targets over the last couple of decades, that modal shift from car dependency to other modes of travel really hasn't happened. It will need huge financial, political, and also public investment in order to achieve the ambition. And we know, from some of the work that's happened, that relationship between investment-led transport planning, multimodal strategies, and a closer link between spatial planning and transport is really important to get an effective shift in our usage patterns. And I think we do continue to see investment in public transport, walking and cycling, but that's not as much as we see for roads, and it's not also with the same financial led approach. And to some ways, we've kind of, our investment is skewed towards roads over walking, cycling, and public transport, which has really created this almost like path dependence and car lock-in, particularly around our spending locations. And if we think about as well our investment in public transport, so in 2017, 2018, public transport and rail in Northern Ireland received funding of around £84 per head. And this is the lowest of all the UK regions. It accounts for about 27% of the UK average expenditure. And really, since 2013, our public transport funding per capita has increased in real terms and also in comparison across Britain. So investment is a particular issue that we do need to look at. But we do know, and from research shows, that where there's positive policies like the regional transport strategy, where there's modal investment in things like the glider and Belfast bikes, and when there's also area-based initiatives such as Belfast on the Move, when those things are in place, we do see clear outcomes that car dependency and car reduction can actually be achieved. And I think the other thing I would say is also looking for that change where the economic discourse in roads-based policy and how that actually interacts with health, social and environmental discourses, that's not really happening in Northern Ireland, and I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, again, a lot of what you're saying, I think, would mirror what we would see from the engineering side in terms of challenges, and again, just reinforcing those opportunities for that intersectoral discourse and actually looking at this problem from a multitude of different perspectives. So just to kind of round up, as I'm kind of conscious we're coming to the end of the session, I'm going to kind of just throw out the same question to all of the panel members. We're obviously at a very unique point in time where we have some really significant commitments in terms of moving towards net zero. We have a lot of challenges across different sectors. But where do you see the key skills deficits lying, and where should we be starting to invest in our next generation of engineers, scientists, public health investment as we're moving forward? And I'll put that to you first, Ruth.
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of a skills perspective, I would have three things on my wish list. One is around to transport planners and urban planners with training and skills in health and public health prevention. And also our public health practitioners and policy makers having skills in behaviour change. And I think at the university we have an important role to play here and could, for example, be providing the training that meets these skills needs.
That's great. Thank you, Ruth. And David?
Yeah, I think the skills, there's a skills gap throughout the entire spectrum. I mean, everything down to technician level, for example. I mean, dealing with a hydrogen bus or an electric vehicle is going to be very different from sort of a normal diesel vehicle. So there's skills there. There's skills which really come core disciplinary skills, the engineering skills in developing new technologies. But as has been pointed out by Ruth and others, there's the whole trans and interdisciplinary type skills that are going to be needed in order to be able to drive a future net zero economy, including behavioural science linked in with engineering and really understanding how people adapt and use technology.
And obviously, as the end user of all of these skills, because we're coming very much from the higher education side, when we move into the kind of the business and industrial sector, where do you see those skills gaps lying for yourselves moving forward?
Just to really echo David's point there, I mean, it's right across the spectrum. I mean, we're heavily recruiting at the minute and will be heavily recruiting for some time across the entire skills area. I mean, there are skills that we do not have enough people in and enough expertise in. So primarily when it comes to dealing with high voltage, comes with gas handling, which are not particularly challenging skills, but just not ones that we have the right levels of training and right availability at to allow us to continue with our growth plans. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to continuing to push the boundaries of the technology development from cleaner fuel cells, bigger fuel cells, from hydrogen combustion engines, better battery packs, better electric drive lines. At the research side, we need a continued push to keep pushing boundaries and making sure that we can continue to lead. So yeah, I see significant investment required across the entire skills area to improve training across the board. It's fundamentally the only way this is going to work if we get the right people trained in the right way, and we can get everybody from the government down to encourage the right technological solutions to the various different problems that we face, which can be battery EV, can be hydrogen fuel cell, or it could be something else that we haven't quite come across yet. And we may end up with a staged plan where we have a plan to get to a certain target in a number of years and then progressively improve going forward. For example, battery electrics might be the right choice for a lot of areas, a lot of different vehicle types today, but there's no guarantee they'll be the right choice beyond 2030. But we need to use that technology that's available today to start the change happening, and we need the skill sets to make that happen.
It's great, thank you very much. And I think in terms of where we're again, reflecting back where we are in Northern Ireland, one of the big advantages we have here is an incredibly vibrant educational sector with high interconnectivity between our further education, higher education, and on into our industrial sector. So I think in terms of closing up today's panel, and obviously we will be around kind of afterwards if anybody does want to have any discussions or follow-ups with any of us, I think it's about that bit around communication, that for us in the higher education sector, we need to know where those skill sets lie or where those skills gaps lie within the rest of the tech and industrial sector so that we can respond effectively in the right change. And to start to have more of these types of forums where we're talking about the issues around climate change and how we can start to work together to address those issues. So thank you very much for coming along this morning, and we look forward to kind of having a chat with you in some of the break sessions and so on later today. Thank you.